Hey everybody, welcome to the Sculpting the Foliage portion of the tutorial. So as you can see here, what I've gone ahead and done is I have taken the concept and brought it into Photoshop here, and you can kind of see all of these different sort of sketches that I have pointing to each one of the pieces of the foliage. So this is something that I've found to be really helpful. I basically just kind of studied each individual little plant that's here and then tried to sort of just pull out the prominent leaf shapes for most of these, or in this case, it's some leaves. We got maybe a little bit of floral bits here and there, some grass and mushrooms. And I kind of tried to just break them down to figure out what I need in order to make these actually work in 3D space. So you can see here that I have some grass that I ended up doing. Now this is kind of simple. This is just like a rough sort of illustration of what it could look like. Obviously, when we get into 3D, it's going to translate a little bit better. But for me, doing this whole entire process just kind of helps my brain to break down all the individual components so that way I can see them and then I'll be able to just sort of reconstruct them back later because, you know, there are several different ways to do foliage. But in this case, since it's not a lot, we're not going to be using this for, you know, grass in a big open field or anything like that. Just really simple. So, you know, just doing a few leaves here and there and then reconstructing them later and sort of composing them to look like the actual piece of foliage. I think that's going to be the best approach here. So moving on, what I decided to do was just sort of take this little clump here, and I think that this would be a really good representation of what this is reflecting. And same here, I basically just, you know, did a few leaves. I looked at all the different sizes of leaves and the little grass elements here, and just sort of, you know, kind of cherry picked some of the pieces I wanted and realized that I could probably get away with doing a combination of around like 4 or so leaves here. And then of course here, you know, it's kind of faint, but you can kind of see these little swirly whimsical bits in here. And so I wanted to make sure to include that. Lastly, with this sort of purpley flower here. Now I looked for a reference specifically for this one just because I wasn't sure entirely what I could do. There's a lot of different things that we could have done here, but you can see some of these look pretty close to what the concept could be. So what I thought would be a good idea is basically what I'll do is I'll sculpt out a stem, and then I'll sculpt out one individual sort of floral flowery bit, and then I'll just end up duplicating this little flower around a bunch of times to sort of give it that effect that we see here in the concept. And then what I did when I was done kind of sketching all of this is I kind of just duplicated this layer, and you can see that I kind of just arranged all of these. And the reason I did this is because now this is sort of like a roadmap for us for what we need to sculpt, and basically how I could lay things out in 2D space while I'm sculpting. So I just found that this method right here would be really helpful for me to just sort of jumpstart the process. I think it's super important to really study what you're about to do instead of just kind of jump in without having any prior knowledge of what you're about to do. Now, this technique that we're about to do in ZBrush is going to be really similar to what we just did with doing the book page sculpts. It'll be a little bit different, but the actual premise of it is pretty much the exact same. And I think this time I'm going to just try to stick to just using ZBrush. That way I can show you maybe some new techniques that you haven't learned yet, and just do everything entirely inside of ZBrush. And with that said, let's go ahead and hop into ZBrush. So before we start, I'll just mention that I did just take a screenshot of the work that I did, and I do have it sort of pulled up on my other monitor now, so you can see along with the rest of my reference, I now have this sort of work. And this is just really here to help guide me through. I don't necessarily need to look at it all the time, but this is just something that, you know, I can look at and sort of reference back to. That way I know just how many pieces I need to do. All right, so starting out, let's go ahead and we'll just close out of this light box here, and we'll just go ahead and click on Subtool, and let's go ahead and just append a plane 3D. We can go ahead and get rid of this poly mesh here. So like before, this plane here is going to represent our 0 to 1 space, our texture space. So theoretically, this could be any size we want. It could be 512 by 512. It could also be 4K by 4K. So we'll worry about that in the end when we're done sculpting. But for now, this plane just kind of represents that canvas in which we can sort of just put our art in. Okay, so what I think we could do is I think we could probably start out doing some of the leaves just to sort of get warmed up a little bit, and since there's quite a few of them. So let's go ahead, and there's a couple of different tricks we could try, and I think maybe I could start out with one that would be pretty fun to do. So what we can do is I'm going to go to geometry, and then I'm going to go ahead and uncheck smooth, and I'm going to divide the plane just a little bit. I think this should be enough for us. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make sure that symmetry is on, which it is, and then I'm going to go ahead and use my mask pen, and I'm just going to sort of sketch out the shape of a leaf, and maybe, you know, something pretty close to what I sort of sketched out in Photoshop. This doesn't have to be perfect because, of course, we can correct any sort of mistake that we see. Okay, so now that we have our leaf shape, let's go ahead and go to extract. And I'm going to go ahead and maybe we'll just try this default thickness. Let's try that one more time. I think this should work for us. It doesn't have to be anything super thick. So let's go ahead and hit accept. And now we basically have a mesh in which we can start with. So make sure to clear that mask. Okay. And basically what we want to do at first is we want topology that's low enough to be able to start to shape our leaf. Without, like, if we go ahead and start to try shaping this, it might be a little bit hard. And, you know, if you have a mesh that is, you know, fairly high, you're going to start to focus on this, you know, the small details instead of this, you know, the really, really big shapes first. So let's just go ahead and let's go to Z remesh, and let's just do a Z remesh. We'll just bring this down, maybe like 0.7, something pretty low. Let's go even lower. And this was something that I was taught when I was in school, is basically when you're starting any kind of sculpt like this from scratch, you really just want to focus on the big shapes first, and then the medium, and then small. Okay, so let's just try to maybe sculpt this up into a leaf shape. Maybe we can kind of just flare the edges just a little bit. And again, I don't know if we really have to worry too much about the thickness. I'll probably just thin it out, maybe just a little bit to start. Because after all, it is stylized, so it doesn't have to be super, you know, razor thin sharp. I know it's tempting to want to increase your subdivision, but trust me, just try to stay as low as possible at the start. It's really going to help you in the long run. Maybe I don't want to have the end be quite so thin. Something like that should work. Now, if we want to, we can start to use our H polish brush and just start to sort of sculpt these edges and make them a little bit thinner. And I should mention too, the size that I chose when I was sculpting this leaf out initially, or using my masking pen, was pretty arbitrary because, you know, at this stage we can always just reshape the leaf however we want and whatever size we want. So I'm gonna go ahead and just use my damn standard brush and start to maybe define this center line a little bit better. Always look at it from the profile as well. Could probably stand to lift this up and just give it a really unique silhouette. And what this is going to end up doing is when it comes time to actually getting the normal map, and actually I can show you this right now. The reason it's important to put a bend on it is because you'll actually start to get a normal map sort of bend color on there, versus if the object is completely flat, it's going to look exactly like this flat color back here. So this will just help to give it a little bit more dimension when you actually get it into 3D space. And of course, you'll see all of this at a little bit later time. Okay, so maybe we could actually add a subdiv here now that we're starting to get a little bit more of our leaf shape. Redefine that edge just a little bit more. We can also use our pinch brush and just sort of start to pinch in this line just a little bit more. Start to smooth out a little bit. Now, the nice thing is that this is stylized, so we really don't have to worry about putting in a lot of detail. I mean, realistically at this stage, you could just call this good if you really, really wanted to. I think what we could do is we could get the point of this to be maybe a little bit pointier, the little end of this. So let's try to use our clipping brushes again. I'm just going to go ahead and grab a clip brush, clip curve, and let's just go ahead and try to clip this a little bit more. Just to try to get more of a hard edge there, more of a point at the end. Let's kind of zoom out just a little bit and add another subdiv here and just sort of see what that looks like. So I'm a pretty big fan of that. I think what we could do is let's go ahead and turn off symmetry. And let's go ahead and just kind of give this a little bit of asymmetry. I think this always makes the asset look a little bit more unique, a little bit less 3D. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it back on and maybe fix this, smooth out this line here. So we're at about 10,000 active points for this, which, you know, that's really not too bad. I mean, it already looks pretty good for only 10,000. That line might be a little bit too harsh, so just turn this down. Something like that even, that's pretty good. So let's go ahead and maybe we can up-res it again just a little bit more, and let's grab out our H polish brush. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off symmetry this time. And let's go ahead and go over the edges, pretty similar to what we did when we were making the paper. This just sort of gives it like a little bit of, kind of like a wonky sort of feel to it, because the edges start to get a little uneven. And I kind of like that. And I don't think we really have to worry too much about the tip of one of these leaves, just because it's probably not going to be seen. You can sort of start to go in here too and just sort of mess up that perfect shape a little bit. I kind of like something like this. It just makes it look a little bit more interesting. You can also use the flatten brush as well. And then maybe what we can do as well is let's get our move brush back. And obviously, like, this is a perfectly straight line here. And I think what we can do is just sort of bend this a little bit, start to break up that 90-degree sort of very harsh line. It will really add up in the end. Okay, that's starting to look pretty cool. I think let's go ahead and just kind of move some of this down a bit more. Maybe we can lower our subdivision for this, that way we're not pulling out a lot. I'm gonna kind of smooth some of this back out just a little bit more. Might be a little bit too intense. Okay, and lastly, what we could try to do is let's get our inflate brush out and let's try to get a little bit more volume in this leaf. So I'm just gonna kind of go around on the outer edges here. And just try to bring back some of the volume that we sculpted in. It kind of makes the leaf feel a little bit lighter. Just kind of go through and smooth out some of that as well. And you know what? Maybe what we can do is let's just kind of go ahead and pull in. I'm going to lower this. Let's go ahead and kind of pull this in just a little bit. And just kind of create a little bit of a stem here. I'm finding that this is actually looking a little bit more convincing. It looks a little bit better. And then we can always just take our H polish brush, or actually let's take our trim dynamic and just kind of sculpt a little bit on this stem and just kind of give it a little bit of a different textural look. Give it sort of a woody feel. And then the last thing that we could probably do, we could take our Damien standard brush, lower the intensity, and maybe what we can do is just kind of lightly, we can hold Alt and just kind of drag on the edges here. Looks like that was maybe a little bit too light, so let's bring it back. Okay, it doesn't look like that's doing a whole lot for us. There we go. Kind of up-res it one more time. Just doing this quickly as a test. So that's kind of cool. It sort of adds like another little layer, like another level of dimension to it. I don't know if it's 100% necessary though, so we'll probably just leave it. But actually, before I forget, let's go ahead and add in some like extra lines here for this leaf, so they kind of branch out. And I'm going to do these kind of like asymmetrically, because I think it just looks a little bit better. Again, if I were sculpting a realistic leaf, you better believe I would have lots of sort of realistic leaf reference pulled up so I know exactly how to sculpt this. But I think in general, like I do have some realistic leaves pulled up and some sculpts, but I think overall getting the impression of a leaf is just going to be what sells this. So if I just kind of zoom out here, yeah, I think this actually this should work pretty nicely, I think, for us. So I'm going to go ahead and move this. Let's go ahead and just kind of move this down a little bit. I can always scale it just a bit. We can always scale it up or down whenever we want to during this process. Okay, so I did have another leaf that was pretty much exactly like this one, but it was just a little bit different. So I'll pull this back here. So you can see that I've got one like this, and then I've got one that's just a little bit different, and it's got basically these little tiny green markings on it. Now, that'll probably be done in the texturing, but we could also add a little bit of sculpted interest to give it this effect as well. So what we can do is we can go ahead and like maybe we'll just scale this one up just a little bit, and then let's just give it, maybe just push it around just a little bit more and give it some different kind of shape just to pull it out. Because, you know, if you're going to make a leaf that's identical, you might as well just completely use this one over again. But if you're going to change it up just enough to where it makes sense to add a new leaf, then I think that's totally okay. Like Maybe this stem is just a little bit longer. Okay, and then let's go ahead and we can grab our orb clay tubes brush and let's try to add, maybe we can add some like little tiny holes in here. I already think that looks pretty cool, to be honest. Maybe we can give it a little bit more res. Same with this one, actually. Let's just res it up and smooth it. If we don't actually res it up, when it comes time to actually doing all of the texturing and you zoom in, you will be able to, like if I zoom in here, maybe lower the subdiv. So you see how you see that sort of like pixelating? Well, you're gonna end up seeing that in the normal map, and we definitely don't want that. So just make sure to have enough resolution. So just kind of putting a circle in here. So I think this looks really cool. I think it really helps to appear stylized. And that way we can have just a little bit different of a shape of a leaf when it comes time to assemble the actual plant. Maybe we'll just move this over just a little bit. That way it's not completely identical. And maybe just go over this section just one more time because it looks like this got smoothed out. All right, cool. So we already have 2 leaves going on. So this would typically be how I would want to go about creating little tiny leaves, right? Is just doing this sort of method of extraction, because this just kind of gives you the power to create shapes that are pretty precise without having to do a whole lot of work. Now, another way we could do this is we could just, instead of being inside of Maya, of course, we could actually just append a shape. Let's go ahead and just append, I think we could just do a cube for now. Let's go ahead and scale this down. And we'll just kind of stretch it up a little bit. We're still on leaves, so let's pretend we're making a smaller, skinnier leaf. Just gonna size it down something like this. Maybe like that. Okay, now let's go ahead and just make sure it's a little bit thinner. All right, so if we go ahead and take a look at the topology, not a whole lot going on. You could come in here and start to shape this a little bit, and I guess we could do that at the start. There's just really not a whole lot to work with here. But, just for the sake of showing different methods of doing this, this is definitely a more controlled way if you feel more comfortable with the sort of like box modeling approach. Definitely okay. And let's just kind of raise this one up just a little bit. I think with this one, we don't actually have to do a stem. This could be more like kind of like a blade of grass, but not really. Maybe just like a bigger leaf. Just kind of give it, somewhat of an interesting silhouette. Okay, so I probably wouldn't smooth it at this point because the topology is just a little bit uneven. So what I want to go ahead and do is let's go to our geometry tab and let's just remesh this one like the rest. Okay, so probably a little bit too high for the start. Let's go ahead and just bring this down. Yeah, I think that'll work just fine. And we can just kind of go ahead and smooth out some of the artifacts that we see. And we'll basically just kind of treat this like the rest of them. Just kind of give it a little bit of an interesting shape down here. Maybe we can sort of give it like an S-curve shape or something, so it kind of does something like this. So just bringing it up at first and pushing this in. Not a huge S-curve, but just a little bit. Again, you have to remember that all of this stuff is basically only, when I'm done with it, we're only going to care about what we see in this camera view. So it doesn't really matter what it looks like too much from the opposite side. I've seen a lot of people that will just do straight leaves, and you know, that's totally fine. It's probably bent up a little bit too much. I can already tell that this will be a little bit too much just because the shape is pretty pronounced curve. So maybe went a little bit too hard on that one. This will probably work. I like that a little bit more. Okay, let's give it some subdivisions. And let's go ahead and add a nice little line straight down the middle. Awesome. That looks pretty good to me. And as always, let's take our pinch brush. Just gonna close the gap as evenly as we can. More subdivs. I think we should probably make this line go basically all the way up to the top here. Kind of just sculpt that in, smooth it. Okay, now let's just go ahead and let's turn off symmetry and start to give this a little bit of uniqueness. And again, it doesn't have to be a whole lot. Like, you don't really have to, you know, push something out like this to give it that uniqueness. Like this could be enough. And I think I actually want this to not pop out as much, so I'm just going to kind of push this back in. And again, anytime you're doing like large movements, like if you're taking something and just really pushing it, make sure that you're at the lowest subdivision, because you're going to be able to sort of just pull all of that information at once and not have to worry where if you pull it like this, you're going to start to pull all these little details. So yeah, let's go ahead and just grab this center line and just kind of give it a little bit of wonkiness. Okay, and then let's go ahead and do the same thing. Let's give it some little lines here. Might have to go up one more subdivision. And I'm just kind of carefully doing this. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Now let's not forget, we can go ahead and take our H polish brush and let's just kind of go ahead and go in. I might actually want to go back and do this so I don't mess up these little lines, but I'll try to just sculpt around these for now and see if that works out in my favor. And we can take our flatten brush and just kind of go over that once more and just kind of break up some of those shapes we just made. Okay, I definitely am liking that. I think we probably could get rid of the shape is just kind of standing out quite a bit. The reason why you don't want to go too heavy with making one of these unique is because we're going to basically be doing something like this. If I just duplicate this, move the pivot down, imagine doing something like this, doing it again. So let's say that a plant is comprised of, maybe it's like 8 or 10 leaves, something like that. If that leaf looks really unique, like this one down here, well, you're going to just notice that repeat all the way around. So if you have a leaf or a piece of foliage that's pretty unique, you probably want to try to make something just like it that's less unique. That way you can't really notice the repeat. So I'm actually pretty happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and just move this down here. And I think that scale is probably the appropriate size for us at the current time. So I'm going to actually go ahead and do this technique again with our masking brush, just because it is, of course, my favorite. So it looks like we need to do sort of like a smaller leaf that's got a little bit more roundness to it. So even something like this, I think that could work. And we're just going to rinse and repeat the same steps. All right, so this one's probably a little bit too round for what I want. I think that we can go ahead and just try to make this a little bit thinner. And let's actually go ahead and just thin this down overall. Give it another Z-remesh. And I should mention, so the reason I'm not dynameshing, which I normally do, is, well, I'll show you. Because the Z-remesh, you see how this has fairly nice even quads and it's really, really clean. Well, that's what I really want, because if I'm going to be working in a method where I'm just basically subdividing and going up and down in subdivisions, this is where I don't want to use Dynamesh, because I want nice, clean topology. And if I Dynamesh right now, let's just do it. You see how it basically kind of destroys the symmetry a little bit, and we just have all of these like sort of uneven lines. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much why I choose to use Z-remesh for stuff like this. Okay, let's go ahead and just rinse and repeat. We'll go ahead and just kind of lift this up a bit. So you can see, I mean, this is pretty much the same method for doing all of this. So it's really, really nice. It's a very effective way to do, you know, you could even do realistic foliage this way. It doesn't have to be stylized, because the principles basically apply to each method. Okay, so let's go ahead. This time we'll actually go through and we'll do some H polish work here first. Sort of go around the leaf a little bit, add some cool little markings and little details. We can even use the trim dynamic brush if we want to. If we want a little bit more edge wear. You can even let's give it one more subdivision. And just kind of keep going back and finessing those shapes out a little bit more. And as always, let's just go ahead and get our move brush and just kind of pull this out just a little bit, pull it out of its perfect shape. Something kind of like that. And let's go ahead and do what we did before with the stem. And we'll just kind of sculpt using our trim dynamic and just kind of sculpt that into maybe more of like a stem shape. kind of round it out a little bit more. And then as always, we can go ahead and let's just kind of carry this line down a bit, break up that evenness. I think that's probably all we need. And lastly, let's just kind of go ahead and add our cute little lines here. And there we go. There is our smaller little leaf. So we can just kind of put that down here. So you can see, I mean, this has taken me maybe about a half an hour or so to do, not very long. So yeah, I mean, I don't do a lot of foliage, but when I do, I mean, I really enjoy it. It's really relaxing to just make these little leaves. All right, so let's do something a little bit different this time. Let's make this little kind of swirly guy. I think that'd be really fun to do. So I'm gonna make sure I got my reference pulled up to make sure I can see that. So even with something like this, I think the method of extracting could be really, really useful. So I'm gonna turn symmetry off for this one, and I'm just gonna go ahead and start to just sort of maybe draw out that shape a little bit. Looks like it kind of comes down, and then it kind of just swirls in on itself just a little bit. And I can always correct this more in 3D. But let's do something maybe a little bit more like this. And I think, you know, since it's not a super complicated shape, but just due to its nature, I think trying to nail this down in 2D is probably going to save you a little bit more time in the long run. Because anything that you don't accomplish in 2D space, you're going to have to correct in 3D. So I think this will probably serve us fairly well. So let's go ahead and extract that, and we'll accept it. Now, obviously, the thing that stands out right away is that, you know, it's very flat. Obviously, I would expect this to be almost a perfect cylinder, so don't worry, we will get there, I promise. Let's go ahead and just Z-remesh it down again. Okay, so let's just kind of slowly go through and let's just kind of smooth this out and see if we can smooth this into more of a cylinder shape. So you notice that I don't have symmetry turned on just because I think that it's not really going to matter in the end. So it looks like I'm starting to actually really smooth my silhouette out of place a little bit. So let's just go ahead and give it another subdivision. That way we don't actually destroy the silhouette we've created. Just kind of like bring some of that back with the move brush. So you notice where it's kind of getting a little bit difficult to get this little side here. So let's try to take our H polish brush and maybe we can just sort of polish this edge out. Can maybe try to do that to the rest of these sides. So you notice how it starts to just slowly stop becoming, you know, a square shape and starts to become more of like that round shape. So something else you can do, if you still look at this, it's still pretty, like, you know, not really cylindrical, and the silhouette right here is still really flat. So what we can do is let's just take our standard brush, and if we just kind of lightly go across it like this, it starts to add volume to the shape. So now we start to get a little bit more of this like kind of roundness, whereas this side, and this side, by the way, we won't actually end up touching because we won't need to. We're only going to use it for this side. So I'll just kind of go through and just kind of start to pull some volumes out of this. And we can even just kind of go up here and start to create the shape. You'll notice that we'll start to lose a little bit of topology. It starts to get a little bit pixelated, and that's okay. Because we're just kind of slowly building up these forms, not in any rush to get to the final result. Just want to take our time. Okay, now let's go ahead and we'll just add another subdiv. We'll take our damn standard brush and we can just kind of sculpt down a little bit more. Just sort of sculpt this edge in. Come back and smooth. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. You know, we're just kind of really just trying to aim for that whimsical feel to it, because I don't think you really see a lot of objects like this in real life. At least I don't. And we could probably add one more subdivision, and you see this area right here. We'll just try to smooth this out, maybe just try to really sculpt that in if we can. Just try to mess with this area a bit more. Always smoothing. Okay, so let's actually look at this here. So if we turn on our wireframe, you can see what's kind of happening. So it looks like the way that the wireframe is going, it's just kind of not really working where we want it to, because obviously this area needs to be, you know, it just needs to follow the shape. So what we can do is we can kind of just sculpt this down a little bit more just to help us. Because what ZRemesh is doing is it looks and it analyzes what shapes are going on here, and then it tries its best to create topology that follows those forms. So if I go ahead and sculpt this down quite a bit, what I'm really doing is telling ZBrush, hey, you know, please treat this as, you know, a form that's getting wrapped around versus something that is just kind of, you know, going through across to the other side like this. So let's go ahead and we'll just kind of ZRemesh this. Let's bring our target up a little bit more. Let's go ahead and try that out. Okay, so that was after the ZRemesh. So you can see that that definitely helped quite a bit. You can see now that our topology is definitely flowing the way that we want it to. It could probably be just a little bit better, but in all honesty, I think this did quite a phenomenal job for us. So let's go ahead and go out of wireframe mode. Let's just kind of clean this shape up just a little bit more. Maybe we can make it a little bit more even if we wanted to. We can kind of smooth the stem out a bit more. So now you can see we definitely got more of a cylindrical shape going on here on this side, which was the goal. So I think we completed that goal. Okay, so let's go ahead and go up a subdivision, just kind of start to smooth some of this out. And remember, always like go back every once in a while and just kind of look at this from a distance and see like if the shape actually holds up quite a bit. think in our case, it does for the most part. I'm a perfectionist, so I'm going to pick out little tiny things that I see and just try to fix that if I can. And we'll just try to sculpt this down just a bit more, because even though this is only just one mesh and we're sculpting into it, I'm really trying to play up the fact that, you know, it's a single stem that's just wrapping around itself. So we can always try to like bring in the pinch brush and maybe pinch these closer together. I think that will definitely help with the illusion. And I don't really care too much about what this piece will end up looking like. Like this little central piece kind of looks like a little bean. Okay, so I don't think there's really too much more that we need to do with this. So let's give it another few subdivisions and just gonna bring it up a bit. Let's see here. Maybe we could use our H polish brush on this part and just sort of maybe sculpt just a little bit. I think this will help to, you know, just define this a little bit better, define this little edge here. It might not, so it's always just good to try it out. I definitely like this. I think, you know, with a lot of stylized stuff, you see a lot of sort of like hard edges. And I think this this definitely could help. Again, this asset is going to be like this big on screen, so probably won't matter that much, but you know, I think that a lot of the times I tell people, yeah, you may not be able to see it in the final, but you now have a cool looking sculpt that you can show off in your portfolio. So, you know, you might as well sculpt something that's pretty cool while you're in here. A cool sculpt never hurt anybody. I'm just going to go over this and smooth it a little bit more. I don't think that there's really a whole lot that I want to do with this after the H polish, just because it just needs to remain fairly simple. But I think a little shape like this, I think that looks pretty nice, if I do say so myself. So let's just go ahead and let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I think that'll be just fine. I'm gonna go ahead and just maybe shrink it down a little bit for now. It is quite small, so maybe something like this, and we'll just kind of place that here for right now. Awesome, so we are just cruising along here. Okay, so it looks like I've got a thinner piece of grass in here. So what I'm looking at right now, I am looking at something like this. So in order to do that fairly quickly, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate this piece of grass right here, or this leaf rather, and I'll move this over. And let's go ahead and let's just drop it down to its lowest subdivision. We'll delete the higher. And let's just kind of smooth this out. This is also a really good method of, you know, utilizing what you already have, because there's just no point to reinvent the wheel multiple times. This will just help to save you quite a bit of time in the long run. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a few different changes here and there. This will also be sort of like a leaf. I can imagine. Actually, here, I'll bring the concept over. I can imagine that every once in a while you'll have a couple of these smaller ones sticking out, and that'll just add a little bit of variety. So since this one is fairly thin, I don't think I really need to do anything too drastic with it. I think I'm just going to kind of, you know, sculpt it maybe just a little bit. Let's see, I actually don't even think that I'm going to give it that sort of like middle line. I think I want to treat this more like kind of like a weed or something. So let's just like take our H polish and just kind of smooth out all of the marks that we had before. Just sort of give it a little bit of a smooth. And then of course we can always just come in here and add a little bit of variety. So there we go. There is one blade of grass done. And I think actually I'm going to kind of go over this just a little bit. I just want it to be fairly simple. I don't want it to be too distracting. So there we go. All right, so moving right along, I think what I'd like to tackle next is we can sort of tackle the little bushel of grass up here. That's some sort of herb or weed or something. We could tackle that. So I think the best way to do that would be to simply duplicate this skinny piece of grass that we just did. And now we can kind of make it a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to go ahead and start to take my move brush, and we can just sort of start to go lower for the subdiv real quick. And we'll start to just kind of move this around. And then let's go ahead and just get a couple more. Okay, now what we can do is we can go ahead and start to shape these, but what we can also try to add to this one is start to like intermix them a little bit. So we can grab this one right here and just maybe tuck it behind a little bit and just sort of stretch it out. Just really give it some interesting kind of shapes to it. And then same with this one, we can kind of just, maybe this one could just be sitting right next to it. And I'll probably just leave the bases of these alone. I'm not going to really want to do too much with that. We can also just kind of push these forward. It'll really show when it comes time to looking at this in 3D, and when you shine a light on it, it's really going to show like this work that we're doing here. So I'm just kind of creating as much variety as possible. One thing when you're doing this method is you want to try to avoid some clipping. So if you can actually see some of the geometry going through the others, you kind of want to clean that up, because it does look pretty noticeable when you get to the final asset. And it's going to be a little challenging to texture as well. I'm going to actually kind of play this one up a little bit more, maybe. We can make this small one go over here. And to be honest, we probably won't even see the base of this, just given what the concept is showing, but you never know. I think what we'll end up using this particular piece for is kind of like a filler. So we'll have our main plants, and then we'll have this grass kind of like in the back of the plants, just to add a little bit of depth to it. So we're really getting some nice overlapping shapes, which just looks really organic. Just kind of pleasing to the eye. These ones look a little too identical. Just kind of raise it. So yeah, something like this. I think that turned out nice. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just kind of go through, and I'm going to just res this all back. So I probably won't do any kind of like sculpting on this one like we've been doing. I think I do see like a little tiny like sculpty bump or something going on with this, so I might just get rid of that. But basically, because there's so many pieces, I just kind of like the way that this stands out on its own. I don't think we need to do anything extra to it to make it any, unique. Again, it's a very small asset, so I don't think it needs too much love, just a little bit. All right, perfect. So one thing we could do is we could actually merge all of this down, and I think I will because, we'll probably want to move this, and I want to keep everything together. So we'll just kind of make sure that these are all the same grass blades we want, and we're just going to kind of merge down. Now we can just center that. We can go ahead and just kind of scale it just a little bit, and we'll just kind of prop it up there for now. Okay, so next let's go ahead and move on to the mushrooms. Now, I thought a lot about these mushrooms, and I think the best way to go about it would be to essentially just have like the top of the mushroom, and then I'm going to go ahead and, if you can imagine wrapping a 2D top onto a 3D object, I think that's going to work out in our favor. And again, you're going to be able to understand a lot of this when, it comes down to the time to construct all of this and put the plans together. It'll make a lot of sense then. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to do the same method here as we've been doing, and I'm just going to kind of get sort of a circular shape. And this time around, I think we could probably increase the thickness by a little bit. Probably just do like maybe 0.05. And let's go ahead and accept that. Okay. And as always, yeah, actually that looks pretty good. As always, we'll just bring this up and we'll give it a nice Z remesh. Probably a little too high. Excellent. Okay, so let's just try to get, a little bit of like what I imagine, a little mushroom top would be. Because these are pretty small, they don't need to be super big, so I'll probably scale it down. One trick you could do is you could use the inflate tool. Just kind of inflate this up just a bit, give it a little nice little round shape. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and, I guess we could clip this right about like right here, and then we'll give it another Z remesh. Okay, perfect. And I'm just going to just kind of maybe push this in. Again, we're not going to see this, but I think for me, it just kind of helps me, gain that perspective of what I'm trying to do. I think we all can kind of in our heads picture what a mushroom looks like, but it's just nice to kind of, sometimes you just got to sculpt a little bit more to kind of get a sense of what you're sculpting. So I'm just going to kind of build up these sides here and maybe push some of this in. Have this come up to more of a point. So if the mushrooms were any bigger than what they are now, I mean, if they were, let's say the size of a baseball or a football or something, then I would probably not be using this technique, because at that point, I probably need to actually have physical geometry instead of like cards or something similar. Probably increase the subdivision just a little bit. And I'm going to get the standard brush, just sort of go around the edges here. And I might just kind of shape this up a little bit better. Having a little bit of unevenness is definitely, that's a good thing. And remember, this is just going to be the top of the mushroom, so I'm going to kind of just switch off and start kind of adding a little bit of asymmetry to this. And again, I'm just going to try to build up these edges pretty slowly. So just like slightly putting in, a couple of dents and then smoothing it out. You see how you just kind of get this really, really nice sort of uneven surface that kind of looks a little bit more intentional and pretty organic. So what we could try to do here is we could use the H polish brush, and let's give that a go and see. I'm going to give it a couple of subdivisions. Let's just kind of smooth this out just a bit. Just give it some of that crispiness. And just go back and I'll smooth it out a little bit. And the last thing we can do the sort of like famous dots that we always see on mushrooms. I always like that. So I'm going to use the clay tubes, and I'm just going to kind of go in here and just kind of give it, a couple of little dots here and there. Something like that works pretty nicely. All right, so that will be the top of the mushroom. I think that's going to be quite convincing. So I'm going to put that right here. And then, of course, for our little stems, what we're going to want to do is just make something that's, well, kind of stem-like. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and have symmetry on. Let's go ahead and just sculpt something like this. And we'll go ahead and bring our thickness back down. And we'll accept that. So again, with this, we can go fairly simple. We don't really need to do anything, extraordinary, because we'll just be mapping probably a fairly low poly cylinder onto this. So it doesn't need to be crazy. All right, so I'm just gonna go through. We could probably get this to be quite a bit lower, actually. Yeah, that works. So I'm just gonna do the same thing we did with the little whirly twirly, little thing over there, and I'm just gonna kind of start to smooth this out, see if I can get sort of like a round shape to it. Kind of just clip the tops and the bottoms. And this should go fairly quick since it's such a small little piece. I'm just going to use the trim dynamic brush and do the same thing that we've done to the other stems. I'm going to give it a little bit of resolution, just sort of go through and start to sculpt, get it a little uneven. It doesn't need to be the prettiest thing in the world, because again, if you think in context how small this thing really is, it's quite small. So, I mean, even something like this, I think, is going to be just fine. I might actually make it just a little bit longer, because I have found that that tends to be what I need to do when I've done pieces like this. Just make it a little bit bigger than you think, and you'll be good. Okay, so I think that should work. I'm just going to double check my reference. Yeah, I mean, at this point, you could really just do, kind of whatever you wanted to. That's just kind of the nature of objects that are really small. So I'm just going to leave this as is. No need to really sculpt this forever. So that'll work just fine. Yeah, and I'll just kind of leave this off to the side here. All right, so we are nearing the end. We're almost there. I'm noticing actually that this the mushroom shape. I want it to be a little more round. So I'm just going to kind of move that out like that. Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to move over to the concept. Now, I think what we can tackle, we've done almost everything on this list, which is really, really fantastic. So let's go ahead and we'll tackle this one right here. I think this will be a really fun challenge. Now, again, we're going to kind of try to, create this using the same techniques. We're not going to do anything too different here. The only thing that's different is that it's, more of an assembly than anything else. Okay, so starting off, we'll go ahead and create the stem of this. So I think that should be just fine. We'll go ahead and extract and accept. And right off the bat, what we can do is just go ahead and clip curve. We'll just clean this up really quickly, get it nice and straight there. And we'll go ahead and Z remesh. Okay, perfect. Let's give this a nice, good smooth. Now for these, I will probably keep these, they won't be perfectly straight. I think we can probably move the stem around just a little bit, but for the most part, it should probably be kept fairly straight. So because you can see that we've kind of ran out of room here, and I think that's going to be fine. What we can do is just kind of rotate this around, and we'll just kind of place it up here like this, and we'll just assemble it up here like that, because we'll have to save room for one more flower. So we'll just kind of smooth this out just a bit. Okay, just move that down. So let's go ahead and we'll create one of the leaves, and this might end up serving as all of the leaves. So let's just kind of create something shaped like this, and we'll just add like a teeny little stem. Okay, and same thing. So because this is going to be like one of our base leaves, there's really no need to sculpt a ton of detail. We're just going to sculpt it right up until the point where we can start adding variety to a bunch of other leaves all at once. So we'll just kind of make our stem, and then we'll just scoot this away and maybe give it a little less thickness. Now we can just sort of start to pop this leaf up a little bit. Okay, and we can now give it a couple more subdivisions, and let's just give it that like classic line. And again, we can make the little stem here. We could probably make that a little bit thinner if we wanted to. And then I'm just going to lightly go over it with an H polish brush. And then I also just want to give it a little bit of, actually we'll wait to do that part, I think. Because we'll want to do that in a little bit. So now that we have this leaf, let's go ahead and just kind of go through and we'll just assemble them. And I'm actually going to face my camera this way. And we'll just go through and yeah, we'll assemble them. I'm going to kind of lift this leaf up just a tad, or the stem rather. Now I think the stem, it could be just a little bit too thick. So let's just kind of thin it out just a little bit. It doesn't need to be too much. That feels a little bit better. Maybe the leaves can be just a bit bigger. All right, so we'll just kind of move this one down. And of course, what we can do is we can just kind of take a leaf like this and just bring it up a little bit more, so that way it's just sort of overlapping over the other one. That's going to look really nice. Okay, and then we'll just go ahead and we'll keep moving along. And then we can always move the pivot by holding Alt. And we'll just kind of move it to where the stem is, and then we can just kind of bend a leaf up just a little bit. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit. And then let's just add a couple of leaves down here, some like really small ones. Now is where we're going to start to get into changing the leaf shapes just a little bit. And I do realize that this leaf right here is clipping over the side, but no worries. We'll go through and we'll make sure we fix that. So yeah, let's just kind of go through, and just like the other ones, let's just kind of add a little bit of shape. I don't want to do too much to the silhouette just because I do really like this shape that I've made here. But we're just going to kind of add a little bit of wonkiness to it. Maybe I can sort of make the stem at the end just a little bit smaller. Add another subdivision here. Yeah, this will just really help to make each one of these feel just a little bit different. Make sure that we don't get it. See this right here? This is the kind of clipping that we definitely don't want. It's something that I do notice a little bit in some people's work, not all the time, but it is quite noticeable when you catch that stuff. And you know, it's a really easy mistake to correct. So a lot of the times if I see clipping, you know, I'm kind of like, you know, maybe you didn't notice it there, or you know, maybe you chose not to correct it, but it is definitely something I recommend checking. Okay, and then we can go through with these ones. Let's kind of push it out a little bit more and make those little tiny stems kind of stick out. Yeah, I think this is looking really cute. So I'm just going to kind of go through and push this down, this top one here. So now I think at this stage we could probably go through, I'll start with this little stem here, and I'm just going to up-res it a little bit, and then I'll just take the H polish brush or even the trim dynamic and just, oops, I saw this here. Make sure we push these stems down just a little bit, but basically go through and just kind of lightly just sculpt on this little stem just a little bit, just because, you know, it's going to add just a little bit of texture variation, and it's going to catch the light really nicely. So that's why I choose to do stuff like this. Okay, now we can go through with the leaves, and we can just kind of go through with our H polish brush and just sort of do exactly what we did before, and just kind of go through and just sculpt around on these just a bit, give them a little bit of texture variation like the stems. I'm actually going to clip off the end here. I see like a little bit sticking out. Not a big deal. And you really don't have to do a whole lot. Like, it just needs to be just enough to where they look a little bit different than one another. So yeah, I don't think I want to do too much more with this. I think what we have is pretty good. Yeah, I actually really like that. I think it's really cute. So again, let's go ahead and we'll move this down, and first we'll just kind of, I think this leaf is just giving me a lot of problems here. Just kind of push that down a little bit. There we go. So just like what we did before, we're just going to go through And we're going to merge all of this down together. All right, so now that it's merged, I'll just go ahead and just kind of center this down here just a little bit, just enough. So then what we can do after that is we can basically, we'll just create our next flower here. I believe this should be our last, if I just double check. I believe that would be our last flower. Okay, so we're going to do something pretty much the exact same as we did here, but instead of leaves this time, we're going to go ahead and we're going to sculpt these really pretty looking flowers. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and borrow the stem that we did last time. So I'm going to duplicate this whole thing, Control-Shift-D, and then I'm just going to go ahead and move it down. And I'm going to turn our wireframe on, and by hitting Control-Shift-Alt, I'm going to go ahead and select the stem, and then I'll go ahead and select Delete Hidden. And it's telling me that I need to delete my subdivisions, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So now we have the exact same stem, which of course, you know, we can always change and we can adjust that so that way they're not the exact same, but just so we don't have to do more work. Okay, I'm just gonna make this one maybe a little bit longer, maybe something like that. And for now, I think what I'll do, just to not get distracted, I'm just gonna kind of rotate this one this way. And then I can have the flowers be on this end of the stem. So these will be a little bit more challenging, I think. Challenging in terms of, you know, it's maybe just a little bit more of a different shape. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is the same exact technique. You guessed it. It'll be some sort of combination between all of these. So basically, if I can kind of screenshot this here, I'm just going to create something that looks a little bit like this. Maybe not as noisy as this, but basically just creating just one of those. Maybe even something closer like this. And you'll see why in just a moment. So at this stage, let's see what the topology looks like. It's probably a little bit too messy for my taste, so I think what I'll do instead is I'm just gonna zero mesh and do it a little bit higher. There we go. Just bring back our nice and even topology. Now obviously this is getting a little bit too big, so I'm gonna shrink it down. I believe we're actually on this side. Now, because there's probably going to be a lot of these, I would say as far as how high you should go with the topology is basically high enough to where it's not going to crash your computer, and you know, low enough to where you won't really see the sort of pixelation. And yeah, if the topology is getting a little too thin, just go back through. And what I might do is my clay polish brush is I'm going to go ahead and make sure my back face masking is turned on. Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and give it another Z-remesh. Yeah, and if an area like this gets too thin, we're just going to go through and inflate it. It's still stylized. And let's use, it's called the snake hook brush, and the hotkey for that is BSK. And what it does is it kind of like when you pull something out, you see how it just kind of goes and keeps snaking out? The move brush will just kind of move something where your mouse will go, but this just kind of has a nice feel. You can kind of just keep, going with it. So if you haven't used the snake hook brush, I would highly recommend it. It's quite good. And I'm just going to kind of just try to grab some of these edges and just kind of bend them out. Kind of like just creating a little petal coming out. So I'm gonna give that a couple of smooths, and I think this is pretty close to what I imagined this was what it was going to look like. So I think just doing a little bit more work here and just kind of building up some of these sides just a little bit more might help. Because again, very small object, won't notice it too much. Yeah, I'll kind of just go through here, maybe with our damn standard brush. And just kind of, do something like this. Make it kind of look like it's sort of blossoming out. With those lines. And I'm going to take the H polish brush and just kind of go through here and polish it up a bit. This kind of gives the effect that it's got like layers a little bit. Kind of like layers to the petal. I think that's pretty cool actually. So yeah, I don't actually think I'll need to really go too much higher in my try count as this. I think that's pretty good. Okay, so let's just shape this just a bit more. I think it just kind of needs to kind of just tilt just a little bit. So I think for this one, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring this stem out a little bit more because since this flower, like these go all the way around it, I think I might try to do that and see if I can pull off that effect. So I'm just going to kind of bring this up a little bit and basically just start duplicating this around. And let's see if we can achieve that effect. So I think it'd be smart to do like one layer at a time, like one little section at a time. And then as they go up, I imagine these are getting like a little bit smaller by the looks of it, maybe not much. Okay, so we got one row done. So what I'm going to do, I am actually going to go ahead and speed up this part of it just because, there's really nothing else that, that I can tell you. It's all pretty much the same. Okay, so that didn't take too much time. Now, obviously, there is something that we have to address, which is basically how even all of these look. So there's a few things you can do before you decide to end up splitting everything apart. And that's just to kind of go through and just, spin these around a little bit, just kind of give them a little bit of a different angle. That's certainly going to help to break up the evenness of all of these. But overall, I think I'm really happy with just how this turned out. I think this is going to be pretty believable. So we can look at it from a distance too and just kind of see, you know, what that looks like. And yeah, I think that, you know, obviously this has a lot of repeat to it. So I think the best thing to do at this point would be to just do a group split. And we don't have to split all of these apart, but I'm just going to kind of select every other for now and just kind of break them apart. So now that we have the individual pieces again, we can just sort of start to, you know, move them around a little bit and spin them, just kind of break them up so that way they don't look, you know, the same. All right, so I think that's as much maneuvering that I want to do with this particular piece. So I think that's going to work out just fine. So as you can see, we have slowly but surely built up our repertoire of our foliage. And this is honestly, I think, one of the, you know, most fun things that we get to do as sculptors and doing stylized stuff is we get to work in this way. And a lot of times you can do this with realistic assets too. In fact, I've done that quite a bit. I think that it's just really fun to, you know, be able to sculpt, you know, in such a fun, whimsical way doing some of this stuff. So in the next coming videos, I'm going to go through and basically break this down, and I'll do an entire video for how we're going to texture this and assemble all of it and get all of that good to go. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video.